The night in space was silent and endless, black as an ocean without waves, and in that darkness a human rescue ship moved like a small silver arrow, its engines humming low as it followed a faint distress signal that pulsed again and again like a heartbeat lost in the void. The crew spoke in quiet voices as they checked the scanners, wondering who or what might be calling for help so far from any safe trade route. The signal was weak and broken, sometimes fading away only to return a few seconds later, and that made the captain think it was coming from a damaged vessel, maybe one that had been drifting for days or weeks. The air inside the ship felt tense, as if every crew member could sense that something unusual waited ahead. The rescue ship's name was Horizon Reach, and it had seen many strange sights in its years of service. But the crew knew that the border of human space was never safe. Pirates, raiders, and even hostile alien factions hunted these outer lanes, and many of them left no survivors at all. Captain Rhodes stood at the forward view window, his eyes locked on the growing shape of a broken ship that now showed on the screen. Its hull was torn open as if something had bitten through it. Pieces of metal drifted around it like frozen shrapnel, and the ship itself turned slowly in the dark as if it were a lifeless body in the current of space. The distress signal came from inside that wreck. As they drew closer, the ship's floodlights washed over the wreck, showing scorch marks and long claw-like cuts along the metal. No signs of life showed on the scanner at first, but then a faint blip appeared deep inside the ship, almost hidden under layers of debris. The captain ordered the boarding team to prepare, and soon a group of humans in light armor moved across the gap between the Horizon Reach and the dead vessel, their magnetic boots clinging to the cold surface, their breathing loud in the helmets as they stepped through a jagged hole in the side. Inside the wreck, the smell of burned metal and smoke still hung in the air. Lights flickered weakly, wires dangled from the ceiling, and broken glass crunched under their boots. The corridors were littered with pieces of machinery and what looked like fragments of personal belongings: a scorched toy, a cracked picture frame, and a torn piece of fabric with strange alien symbols on it. Every step echoed, and the team felt like they were walking through the bones of something long dead. In one corridor, they found bodies twisted and burned, their faces frozen in expressions of fear and pain. The team leader shook his head. "No survivors here," he said in a low voice. But the scanner showed that the faint life sign was still there, somewhere deeper in the wreck. They followed the signal through narrow passages until they reached a cargo hold. The room was dark except for the thin beams of their flashlights. Huge metal crates were scattered across the floor, some torn open, others crushed under fallen beams. In the far corners, something shifted. A faint sound like breathing reached their ears. They moved closer, weapons ready, and saw a small shape pressed into the shadows between two broken crates. It was a child, thin and trembling, her skin a pale silver blue, her eyes large and glowing faintly in the dark. She did not speak. She did not cry. She only stared at them with a gaze that was too steady for a child her age. The team approached slowly, telling her in soft voices that they were here to help. She did not move, but her eyes followed every hand gesture, every step, as if she was studying them, measuring them, deciding if they were a threat or not. Captain Rhodes came forward, kneeling so his face was level with hers, his voice gentle as he asked her name. She did not answer. She only looked at him with an expression that felt both afraid and stubborn. He offered his hand, and after a long moment she took it, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. The captain could feel the bones of her fingers pressing into his glove. They wrapped her in a warm emergency blanket and carried her back to the Horizon Reach. She stayed silent the entire time, her eyes never resting on one person for long. Instead, they kept sweeping across the ship's corridors and equipment, as if memorizing everything. The crew could feel there was something unusual about her, not just because she was the only survivor, but because she did not act like any other rescued child they had seen before. She seemed alert in a way that was almost unsettling, like she was already planning something they could not guess. In the med bay, the doctors checked her injuries, finding only minor cuts and bruises. Though they said she was malnourished and dehydrated, they gave her food and water, but she ate in small, careful bites. never lowering her gaze. The captain asked the doctor if she had spoken, but the answer was no, not a word, not even in her own language. It was as if she had decided that silence was safer than speech, that words could be used against her. Later that night, as the ship began its journey back toward human territory, Captain Rhodes sat in his cabin reading the report on the destroyed vessel. Its registry belonged to an alien race known for staying far from human space, peaceful traders who never took part in wars. Yet the wreck showed signs of heavy weapons fire, and something else, something like claw marks, and the distress beacon had been activated only minutes before the ship's destruction. Whoever had attacked them had left quickly, as if they had taken what they wanted and vanished. Rhodes thought about the girl, about the way she had looked at him when they found her. There had been fear in her eyes, but also a strange sharpness, like the mind behind them was already older than her small body. He decided she would not be sent to an orphanage in a neutral zone. Instead, he would take her back to his home colony, where he and his wife could raise her, give her a family, and maybe, over time, learn her story. He did not know then that this choice would change the course of her life and perhaps the fate of many others as well. But some part of him felt that she was important, that she had survived for a reason. As the Horizon Reach moved away from the site of the wreck, the crew did not see the shadow that drifted in the distance, an alien vessel with no running lights, its hull black and sleek. Watching them through long-range scanners, the ship held its position for a moment before vanishing into warp space, leaving only the empty stars behind. Somewhere out there, in the cold dark, someone had noticed that the girl was alive, and someone would not forget it. The human colony on the border world of Eridan Prime was a place of wide skies, steel walls, and strong hands, built by people who knew that the frontier was never gentle and that survival belonged only to those who worked harder than the storms and fought harder than the raiders. Here the girl the captain had brought home was given the name Vera, a name simple and strong. A name she accepted with a small nod, though she still did not speak much. In the early days, she spent most of her time watching, always watching, her sharp silver-blue eyes following the movements of the colonists as they worked, traded, repaired machines, and drilled with weapons. She moved quietly through the dusty streets as if she could pass unseen whenever she wished. Captain Rhodes and his wife treated her as their own daughter. They gave her a small room with a bed and a desk, clothes and simple toys, though Vera rarely touched the toys except to place them in a neat line as if she was arranging equipment. She preferred to be outside, near the training fields where the colony militia practiced with rifles and close combat drills. The captain at first thought she was simply curious, but when he tried to guide her away, she asked in a soft, careful voice if she could try holding one of the practice sticks. It was the first time she had spoken since the day they found her. Her voice was calm and without fear, so he gave her a chance, and soon he saw something that made him pause. Her movements were quick and precise, her grip steady, and she seemed to learn each strike after seeing it only once. Word spread among the militia that the captain's adopted daughter was unusually fast and strong for her size, and though she was still just a child, she began joining training sessions, at first with simple wooden sticks, then with the lightweight training blades that flashed in the sun. She rarely smiled, but when she trained there was a focus in her eyes that made the older trainees step back and take her seriously. They did not know that every movement she made was taken from memories she carried from before the wreck, memories of a culture that taught its young to fight before they could write their own names. But in the colony, her alien skill mixed with human technique, becoming something new. Eridan Prime was not an easy home. It sat near several unclaimed systems where pirates, mercenaries, and hostile alien clans fought over resources. The colony kept its defenses high and its people armed. Raids were not rare, and everyone knew the sound of the alarm sirens that could call them to battle at any time. Vera listened to these alarms with an alertness that seemed deeper than fear. She would stop whatever she was doing, tilt her head slightly, and then move toward the militia barracks, as if ready to take her place. Though Captain Rhodes still kept her away from real fights, she learned from every drill, every defense patrol, every brief skirmish at the walls. In the evenings, she sometimes sparred with the captain himself, a man who had once served in the Earth Defense Corps and carried the scars to prove it. She moved fast, and though he was stronger, she could force him to fight with all his skill, One night, after such a match, he sat her down and asked why she trained so hard. She looked at him for a long time, then said only that she never wanted to be weak again. It was the most she had spoken in months, and he understood then that her silence was not emptiness, it was discipline. The years passed, and Vera grew taller, her limbs lean and strong, her eyes still sharp, her movements smoother and more dangerous. The other young people in the colony respected her. Some even feared her a little, though she never started fights and spoke to others with simple politeness. She was not like the other children. She did not laugh often or play games. Instead, she studied the maps of nearby systems, learned the codes used by freighter crews, and memorized the faces of travelers who passed through the colony. Sometimes she asked quiet questions about the symbols on certain ships, and when told they belonged to traders or mercenaries, she would nod, but keep her thoughts to herself. Captain Rhodes noticed her habit of watching new arrivals and began to suspect she was looking for something or someone. He thought perhaps she still hoped to find others of her kind, but when he asked, she only replied that it was important to know who came and when in a place so close to danger. Her answer made sense, but the way she said it made him think there was more behind it, something she was not ready to share. Life on Eridan Prime was a constant mix of work and vigilance, and Vera became part of that life as naturally as if she had been born there. She helped with repairs to the wall fortifications, carried supplies to the militia, and even worked in a shipyard where she learned the basics of small craft maintenance. She could take apart a pulse rifle and reassemble it faster than most of the trained soldiers. And though she still rarely spoke at length, her presence in any group brought a quiet sense of security, as if people felt safer just knowing she was near. One evening, when the twin moons hung low over the colony, a convoy of human freighters arrived, escorted by a mercenary ship painted in black and red. Vera was at the landing platform delivering tools to the shipyard when she saw a crate being unloaded from the mercenary vessel. On the side of the crate was a small mark burned into the metal, a symbol almost hidden by scratches, but she recognized it instantly. It was the same mark she had seen long ago in the cargo hold of her destroyed home. Ship. Her heart seemed to slow as she stared at it, and for the first time in years a deep cold spread through her chest. She did not rush forward. She did not speak. Instead, she finished delivering the tools and slipped away into the shadows of the dock. From there, she watched the mercenaries unload the rest of their cargo, memorizing faces, voices, and the layout of their ship. She stayed there until the sun rose over the horizon and the convoy departed. And when she returned home, Captain Rhodes noticed that her mood had changed, though she said nothing. Her eyes were darker, her movements sharper, and she began training with more intensity than before. Weeks later, in the middle of a quiet night, the colony's perimeter alarms blared to life. The sky lit up with the red glow of alert beacons, and distant shapes moved fast toward the outer wall. Captain Rhodes gathered the militia, but before they could engage the intruders, Vera had already moved ahead. She climbed the outer watchtower and spotted a group of masked figures cutting through the fence near the storage yards. Without hesitation, she slipped down and moved through the shadows toward them, her bare feet silent on the ground. When one of the intruders looked up, it was already too late. She struck with speed and precision, knocking the weapon from his hands, spinning to disarm the second, and sweeping the legs from the third. The fight was over before the alarm team reached the scene. The militia took the surviving intruders into custody, but one of them, bleeding and weak, looked at Vera with wide, fearful eyes and whispered a single name in a language most humans could not understand. But Vera understood it well enough. It was a name from her past, a name she had not heard since the day she was pulled from the wreckage, and hearing it now made her certain of something she had long suspected. They were still looking for her, and they would not stop. The sun rose over Eridan Prime in a pale gold light that stretched across the walls of the colony and reached into the streets where traders and farmers began their daily work. Yet Vera was already awake long before the light touched her window. She had been training since the first gray hint of dawn, each strike of her practiced blade slicing the air with precision, each step placed exactly where it needed to be, her breath steady, her mind sharp. But even as she moved through the familiar patterns, there was a shadow in her thoughts, The whisper of the name the masked intruder had spoken the night of the raid, it echoed in her head like a warning bell. And she knew it was not just a name. It was a thread that connected her to something larger, something dangerous, something that had not forgotten her. Captain Rhodes had asked her about it after the raid, his voice careful, his eyes searching her face for answers. But Vera had only said that it was nothing, a lie so smooth it felt like truth, yet she could tell he did not fully believe her. Still, he did not press further, perhaps because he knew that Vera never spoke without purpose and would share her secrets only when she was ready. And Vera was far from ready. She needed time. She needed information. And most of all, she needed to know how close the danger really was. In the weeks that followed, she became more alert than ever, her eyes scanning every face in the marketplace, her ears catching fragments of conversation from travelers, her gaze often drawn to the landing platforms where ships came and went under the watch of the dock crews. She began to notice patterns she had not seen before, certain cargo ships arriving without cargo, certain crews asking quiet questions about the colony's defenses, certain mercenaries staying just long enough to map the streets before departing. It was a slow drip of signs that painted a clear picture in her mind. Someone was preparing for something, and she had no doubt that she was the target. One evening, a freighter from the Varan Trade Union docked at the colony, its hull marked with harmless merchant insignia. But Vera saw how the crew moved with the weight of people who had seen combat. They scanned the streets with careful eyes, their hands never far from the weapons at their belts. She followed them at a distance as they unloaded supplies, slipping between the shadows of the buildings, listening to their talk. Most of it was ordinary, prices and routes and weather on distant worlds. But then she heard one of them mutter about a bounty so high that no crew in the outer systems could ignore it. The description was vague, but the way they spoke made her certain they were talking about her, or at least someone who matched her. That night, she went to the archives in the militia hall, a place few people visited unless they needed records of old trade deals or patrol logs. There she searched for information on ships and crews that had entered Eridan Prime in the last 2 years. The lists were long, but she had patience, and she began to see the same names and ships appear again and again, sometimes months apart, sometimes only weeks, always with no clear reason for being there. And more than once the names were tied to mercenary groups she had heard whispered about in the darker corners of the docks, the kind of groups that would burn an entire world to collect a reward. As she closed the archive, a thought began to form in her mind, a thought she had been avoiding for years. The attack that had destroyed her home ship had not been random. The enemy had been looking for her even then, and if they had not stopped searching in all this time, it meant she was more important to them than she had ever wanted to believe, and that meant they would come again, harder, faster, and with more force than the last time. She could not let them catch her unprepared. A few days later, just before sunset, a stranger arrived at the colony gates, a tall figure in a long coat, face half hidden by the shadow of a hood. The guards let him in after checking his papers, but Vera watched from the rooftops as he moved through the streets, stopping often to ask questions, his manner polite, but his gaze sharp. She followed him until he entered the old cantina near the southern wall, slipping inside behind him and sitting in a shadowed corner. From there, she listened as he spoke with a group of local workers, offering to pay for information about a silver-blue alien female living among the humans. The workers laughed it off, pretending they knew nothing, but Vera could see the glint of coins in their eyes, and she knew it was only a matter of time before someone decided that selling her out was worth more than keeping her secret. That night, she slipped out of her home and went to the militia armory, where she quietly gathered extra ammunition, a compact rifle, and a set of throwing blades. She moved like a ghost, her steps silent, her hands steady, her mind clear. She would not wait for the danger to come crashing through the colony gates. She would meet it head-on, track it back to its source, and find out why they hunted her so relentlessly. 2 days later, the answer began to reveal itself, when a cargo runner bound for the distant rim station sent a coded transmission to the colony, claiming that a group of unknown warships had been spotted gathering in the shadow of a dead moon near the trade lanes. The message was not meant for the public, but Vera intercepted it while passing through the comms room. The coordinates made her blood run cold. They were close enough that an attack could be launched within hours. She told no one, not even Captain Rhodes. Instead, she left the colony under the cover of night, boarding a small scout ship she had repaired over months in the shipyard. It was fast and silent, perfect for slipping past blockades. Flying through the empty dark between stars, she reached the coordinates and found herself staring at a fleet of black warships hanging in space like predators waiting for the right moment to strike. They bore no markings, but Vera recognized their design. The same shadowy curves and claw-like hull she had seen on the day her home ship was destroyed. Seeing them again filled her with a cold fire, a heat that settled deep in her bones. She counted their numbers, mapped their positions, and then pulled away before their sensors could detect her, her mind racing with what she had learned. This was not just a raid force. It was a hunting pack, and she was the prey they had been sent to bring in. When she returned to the colony, the air was already thick with tension. Captain Rhodes was gathering the militia, the sirens howling in the distance, spotters on the wall reporting that unknown ships had entered the system. Vera moved through the streets toward the armory, her thoughts calm despite the danger. She had seen the enemy. She knew their shape, their speed, their weakness, and she would use every bit of that knowledge to turn the hunt against them, because she had made a decision as clear as the cold stars above. She would not run. She would fight, and this time she would make sure none of them ever came for her again. The sky above Eridan Prime was still dark when the first enemy ships broke through the outer atmosphere, their black hulls cutting across the night like blades, silent at first, and then roaring with the sound of engines that shook the ground. The colony's sirens screamed across every street, red lights flashing against metal walls as people ran for cover. The militia moved quickly to the gates and towers, weapons ready, faces set with grim determination. Captain Rhodes stood at the center of the command post, barking orders, sending teams to reinforce weak points, and watching the sky for any sign of the next wave. Vera was already there by his side, her rifle slung across her shoulder, her eyes fixed on the enemy as they descended like vultures. The first explosions came from the western perimeter, where a barrage of plasma fire slammed into the wall, sending dust and shards of metal into the air. Militia soldiers ducked behind barriers and returned fire, their shots flashing bright against the dark ships. Vera moved with calm precision, sliding into position, her hands steady as she fired at the enemy landing craft that hovered just above the ground. She aimed for engines and weapon mounts, crippling two before they could unload their troops. Her movements were swift and without waste, every shot placed exactly where it needed to be. The soldiers around her began to follow her lead, focusing on disabling the ships instead of just scattering fire. Then the enemy ground troops charged, tall and armored in black plates, their faces hidden behind sharp visors. They moved in formation, advancing with shields raised and weapons blazing. The militia met them with a hail of fire, the air filled with the smell of burned metal and scorched earth. Vera ducked behind a barricade, swapping her rifle for the blade she carried. The close fight was about to begin. She waited until the first line of enemy soldiers reached the barricade. Then she moved, like lightning, slipping through their guard, striking at weak points between armor plates. Each movement fast and precise. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The clash was brutal, the sound of metal striking metal mixing with shouts and the crack of weapons. Vera's focus narrowed to the fight in front of her. The enemy was strong, but they were used to facing fear, not someone who moved toward them with relentless intent. She cut down one, two, three before they realized she was more than just another defender. She was hunting them, forcing them back step by step. And as they retreated, the militia pushed forward, gaining ground and driving them away from the breach. But the victory was brief. More enemy ships broke through the clouds, dropping heavy assault units into the heart of the colony. Bypassing the walls entirely, explosions tore through buildings, sending fire and debris into the streets. Captain Rhodes ordered teams to break off and defend the civilians. Vera hesitated for only a second before she sprinted toward the central square, where smoke was rising in thick black columns. The ground shook as a massive enemy war machine stalked through the streets, its heavy cannon tearing holes through anything in its path. Militia fire bounced off its armor, doing little more than scratch the surface. Vera moved low and fast, weaving between cover as she closed the distance. She remembered seeing similar machines during her earliest memories, remembered where the joints and power lines were hidden, and when she reached the base of the machine, she scaled it with quick, sharp movements. Her blades slicing into exposed cables under its armor plating, the machine staggered, sparks flying as its systems failed. She drove her blade deeper until the entire frame shuddered and fell to its knees. Collapsing in a cloud of dust and smoke, the militia let out a cheer, their morale lifting for the first time since the attack began. Still, the enemy kept coming, pouring into the colony from every direction, each wave seeming more determined than the last. And in the chaos, Vera spotted something that made her heart harden. Among the soldiers was a commander wearing the same mark she had seen on the crate weeks before, the same mark burned in her memory from the day her home ship was destroyed. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew he would win, barking orders in a sharp alien tongue, rallying his troops, and pushing toward the command post. Vera's hands tightened on her blades. She could almost feel the heat of that day long ago, the fire, the screams, the cold of the cargo crate she had hidden in, and she knew she could not let him leave here alive. She broke through the melee, cutting down anyone who stepped in her path, moving toward the commander like a shadow drawn by the heat of a flame. He saw her coming and turned to face her, drawing a long, curved blade, his stance wide and ready, their eyes locked for a heartbeat. And in that moment, Vera felt the weight of all the years between them. Then they clashed, blades striking with the sound of metal screaming against metal, sparks flying in the air around them. He was strong and skilled. But Vera had the speed of her kind and the cunning of human training. She read his movements, turned his strength against him, and step by step she forced him back. Around them the battle raged, but in Vera's mind there was only the fight, the sound of his breath, the angle of his strikes, the rhythm of his footwork, until at last she saw her opening, a single gap in his guard, and she struck, her blade sliding between his armor plates, the force driving him to his knees. He tried to speak, but she silenced him with one final strike, his body falling to the ground with a heavy thud, the mark on his armor dark against the dust. The soldiers who had followed him faltered, their formation breaking, and the militia seized the chance to drive them back toward their ships. The enemy began to retreat, lifting off in small groups, some ships leaving the atmosphere in flames as militia fire tore into them. The survivors moved quickly, covering each other as they escaped, leaving behind only the wreckage of their attack, the ground littered with twisted metal, burned-out machines, and the still forms of those who had not lived to see the dawn. The sirens slowly faded, replaced by the low sound of voices, some relieved, some mourning. The battle was over for now. But Vera knew it was not the end, not even close. In the aftermath, Captain Rhodes found her standing alone near the remains of the commander she had killed, her eyes fixed on the mark carved into his armor. He asked her if she knew who they were, and this time she did not lie. She told him they were the same faction that had destroyed her home, the same faction that had hunted her for years, and that they would keep coming until one side was gone forever. Rhodes listened without speaking, then put a hand on her shoulder and told her that she would not face them alone. But Vera's gaze was already on the horizon, where the sky was brightening with the first light of morning. She had fought well, but she had also learned something in the fire of this battle. They wanted her badly enough to risk attacking a fortified human colony, and that meant she had a weapon she could use against them, herself. She would not wait for them to choose the next battlefield. She would go to them, find their strongholds, strike at their heart, and make them fear the prey they had been chasing. She had been raised among humans, taught their ways, their tactics, their will to fight until the last breath. And now the human fire burned alongside the cold precision of her own kind, making her something new, something deadly, something they had never faced before. And when she came for them, there would be no retreat, no safe place left in the galaxy for them to hide. The fires of the battle on Eridan Prime had barely faded when Vera made her decision. She could not wait for the enemy to choose the time and place of the next fight. She needed to take the war to them, to find them before they could find her, to strike where they thought themselves untouchable. So she left the colony in the quiet hours before dawn, her belongings packed into a small transport craft she had repaired herself. Captain Rhodes found her at the landing pad and tried to speak, his voice heavy with both pride and worry. He told her that she had a place in the colony, that she did not need to walk this dangerous path alone, but Vera only bowed her head slightly and promised she would return. Then the ship lifted into the cold sky, its engines a low hum, fading into the distance. Her first destination was the Freeport station of Calvaris, a place where law was a thin idea and most disputes were settled with credits or blood. It was here that she sought out the Iron Hounds, a human mercenary company known for taking the jobs no one else dared accept. Their members were hardened soldiers, exiles, and wanderers who had traded the safety of settled worlds for the sharp edge of constant danger. When Vera found their captain in the smoky haze of the station's cantina, looked her up and down with an expression that was half curiosity and half disbelief, she was younger than most who came to him, but her eyes carried the same weight he saw in veterans of 100 battles. She asked to join without pretense, no stories, no plea, just a simple offer to work for pay and to take the missions others feared. The captain agreed on one condition, that she prove herself in the field. The next day, she went with them on a contract to clear out a pirate base hidden in the wreck of an old freighter. The fight was fast and vicious, pirates spilling out of every passage with crude weapons and desperate fury. Vera moved through them like a shadow with teeth, her blades and rifle working as one, each target falling before they even understood she was there. By the end of the mission, the Iron Hounds no longer looked at her as a newcomer. They looked at her as one of their own. Months turned into years, and Vera's name began to spread in whispers across the trade lanes and border worlds. She took contracts against warlords, raider clans, and alien assassins. Never failing, never hesitating, her methods were clean and efficient. She did not waste words or time, and though she rarely smiled, there was a certain loyalty in the way she fought beside the Iron Hounds. She never left a comrade behind, never broke a promise, and always delivered on the job. Enemies began calling her the apex predator, a name that clung to her like a shadow, a name that made some flee at the mere sound of it. But behind every mission, every credit earned, there was another purpose. Each contract was chosen with care, not just for pay, but for the chance to gather pieces of a puzzle. She sought information about the faction that had destroyed her home, following rumors, intercepted messages, and the broken words of dying soldiers who recognized her face. The trail was slow and dangerous, leading her deeper into the uncharted sectors where the maps were little more than guesses and the stars themselves seemed colder. On one such mission, the Iron Hounds were hired to protect a convoy carrying rare minerals through the Nazca Rift, a region of shifting asteroid fields and electromagnetic storms. The job seemed simple until the convoy was ambushed by a fleet flying black holes with no markings. The same silent shapes Vera knew all too well. The fight was brutal, the asteroids forcing both sides to weave and twist in deadly patterns. Ships shattering against rock and fire, lighting the shadows. Vera took command of the escort ships when the Hound's captain was wounded, her voice steady over comms as she guided the convoy through the chaos, striking at the enemy with precision, disabling engines and weapons rather than destroying outright. She wanted prisoners, she wanted answers. By the end of the battle, 2 enemy ships were disabled and boarded, their crews captured. Vera interrogated them herself, her calm voice and cold eyes cutting deeper than threats. Most refused to speak, but one, bleeding and broken, whispered coordinates before losing consciousness, a place far beyond any charted trade route, a place where he claimed the faction's leaders met in secret. Vera locked the information in her mind, knowing it was a step closer to the heart of the hunt. The Hounds moved from system to system, their work leaving a trail of rumors, some calling Vera a hero, others a ghost, and some swearing she was not entirely human. She ignored the talk, focusing instead on sharpening her skills, learning new weapons, studying enemy tactics, and adapting to every environment from frozen moons to burning deserts. Her body grew stronger, her reflexes faster. But more than that, her mind became sharper, able to read the flow of a battle before it began, able to see the cracks in an enemy's plan before they knew they had made a mistake. One night on a dusty mining world, after a long day of guarding supply routes from raiders, Vera stood alone on a cliff overlooking the horizon, the wind carrying the smell of iron and smoke. In her hand, she held a small fragment of metal engraved with the mark she had carried in her memory since childhood. She had taken it from the armor of an enemy commander weeks before. The metal was cold and heavy, a reminder of the path she had chosen and the distance still left to travel. She thought of Eridan Prime, of Captain Rhodes and his wife, of the safety she had left behind, and she wondered if they would recognize her now, if they would still see the girl they had rescued, or only the predator she had become. The next morning, a new contract came in, one that would take the hounds close to the coordinates she had been given by the prisoner. It was risky, the pay was low, and the mission details vague, but Vera pushed for them to accept, framing it as an easy job with the potential for bigger rewards. The captain agreed, trusting her judgment as he had many times before, and so the Iron Hounds set course for the edge of the known galaxy, their ships moving like wolves through the dark, hunting something that did not yet know it was being hunted. As they traveled, Vera spent long hours in the quiet of her quarters, reviewing star charts and running simulations of possible enemy defenses. She knew the faction would not leave such a meeting place unguarded. They would have fleets, planetary shields, maybe even traps laid in the space around it. But she also knew that the element of surprise was hers. They believed her to be a target still running, still hiding, not realizing that she had turned and was now closing in on them. Each jump through space brought her closer, each passing hour tightening the coil of determination inside her. When the hounds reached the edge of the final jump, Vera stood in the hangar with her armor laid out before her. Every piece checked and rechecked, her weapons sharpened and loaded. Her mind clear, she had walked the path from orphan to soldier to mercenary, and now she was stepping into the role she had been building toward for years, the hunter standing at the door of the prey's den, ready to tear it open and drag them into the light. Whatever waited beyond the jump would not matter because she would not stop until the mark that had haunted her life was erased from the galaxy. The final jump carried the Iron Hounds into a stretch of space so dark it felt as if the stars themselves had been swallowed by some unseen beast. The void around them was silent and heavy, as if watching their approach with unseen eyes. Vera stood on the bridge beside the captain, her gaze fixed on the distant shape that began to emerge from the shadows. It was a station unlike any they had seen before, a massive ring of black metal surrounding a core that pulsed with faint crimson light. Its surface was lined with towers and weapon arrays, each moving slowly like the eyes of a predator searching for prey. The coordinates had been correct, and Vera knew without doubt this was the place where the enemy gathered. The Hound's captain ordered the ships to drift in slowly with power signatures low, using the asteroid belt nearby for cover. The crew moved with the kind of quiet precision that came from years of dangerous work. Vera studied the station through the viewport, memorizing its layout and marking potential entry points. There were docking bays along the lower arc and what looked like maintenance tunnels near the spine of the ring. The latter would be less defended, but more dangerous if they were discovered. She decided that was the way they would go. The captain gave a slow nod, trusting her choice. As they drew closer, the station loomed over them like a silent giant, its black hull swallowing the faint light from distant stars. Vera gathered her strike team in the hangar, 6 of the Hound's best soldiers, each armed with gear for silent movement. They wore light armor painted in dull shades to blend with shadow. Their weapons were clean and ready. No one spoke as they boarded the small stealth shuttle that would carry them across the gap to the station. The shuttle detached and glided forward, its engines barely whispering against the void. The station grew larger until it filled every angle of their view. Every line of its design seemed built to intimidate. The shuttle latched onto the side of a maintenance tunnel, magnetic clamps biting into the cold metal. Vera was the first out, her boots landing without a sound. The tunnel's outer hatch was locked, but she had prepared for this. Her hands moved with practiced speed as she worked a bypass tool into the panel. Sparks danced, and the lock gave a soft hiss as it released. They slipped inside one by one, the air within stale and cold, carrying the faint tang of machine oil. the tunnel stretched ahead. In dim red light, the hum of the station's systems vibrating faintly underfoot. They moved quickly but carefully, their steps silent, their eyes scanning every shadow. Vera's mind was sharp, reading the subtle signs of security patterns, the placement of cameras, the timing of automated drones that passed overhead. Each time they reached a blind corner, she signaled with small hand gestures, directing her team to cover angles and hold positions. Twice they narrowly avoided patrols, once hiding in a maintenance alcove as two armored guards passed close enough for Vera to see the etched mark on their shoulders, the same mark she had carried in her mind for so long. Her jaw tightened, but she stayed still until they were gone. After an hour, they reached a wide shaft running through the station's center. Great pipes and cables ran along its sides, carrying power and coolant to the core. Below them, the faint crimson glow was stronger, pulsing like a heartbeat. Above them, the shaft disappeared into shadow. Vera led them along a narrow maintenance catwalk until they reached a small control room. Inside, they found a terminal still active. One of the hounds began slicing into its data feeds, pulling schematics and access codes. The maps revealed that the core chamber below was heavily shielded and surrounded by barracks, armories, and command rooms. This was not just a meeting point. It was the central nerve of the enemy's operations. Destroying it could cripple their ability to wage war. But Vera wanted more than destruction. She wanted answers, and she wanted the leaders alive if possible. The data feed showed a secure meeting scheduled to take place within the hour. The location was deep in the central chamber at the base of the core. Heavy security and multiple sealed access points stood in the way. Still, she knew this was the moment she had been hunting for years. Every step of her life had led here, every fight, every scar, every night spent staring into the dark and wondering if she would ever find them. The team moved deeper into the station, weaving through service corridors and ventilation shafts. Their progress slow but steady. The closer they got, the more they felt the weight of enemy presence. Voices echoing faintly, the clank of boots on metal floors, the hum of power fields. They came upon a large blast door guarded by 2 sentries in heavy armor. Vera signaled for a silent takedown. 2 of the hounds moved like shadows, striking from behind with swift precision. The guards went down without a sound, and the team slipped through the door before any alarms could be raised. Inside was a wide chamber filled with storage crates and stacked equipment. It smelled of oil and cold metal. They crossed it quickly and reached another access point, this one leading to a narrow stairwell that spiraled downward. The air grew warmer and the crimson glow stronger with each step. Vera could feel her pulse matching the beat of that strange light. The stairwell ended in a small landing where they could see into the heart of the station. Through a reinforced glass wall lay the core chamber, massive and alive with energy, and at its center a raised platform where a group of figures stood in conversation. Vera's eyes locked onto one of them, a tall figure in ornate armor with the same mark etched across the chest plate. Even at this distance, she could see the confidence in their stance, the way the others deferred to them. She knew without doubt this was one of the leaders, the one who had ordered the destruction of her home, the one whose shadow had followed her for years. Rage burned in her chest, but she kept it hidden behind cold control. There was still work to be done, still traps to avoid, and moves to make before the strike had come. The team planted small signal boosters along the corridor to keep communication clear, then took positions at the 2 main entrances to the chamber. Vera studied the security layout, noting the positions of guards and the pattern of their patrols. She waited for the perfect moment, a shift change when the inner ring would be at its weakest. When it came, she moved with speed and silence, crossing the distance to the nearest guard and taking them down before they could react. The others followed, each taking out a target in a coordinated sweep. In less than a minute, the outer defenses were down and the path to the leaders lay open. They stepped into the chamber, weapons ready, the leaders turning in surprise, shouts rising, hands going for sidearms. Vera's voice cut through the chaos, calm and cold, telling them to surrender, to drop their weapons. But they hesitated, some defiant, some fearful. The tall, armored figure stepped forward, eyes locked on hers, recognition flickering in their gaze. A slow smile forming, as if they had been waiting for this meeting as long as she had. Words were exchanged, sharp and edged with history, the others listening in tense silence as the weight of their shared past filled the room. Then, without warning, the floor beneath them shook, alarms blaring as heavy doors slammed shut across the chamber, sealing them inside. Vera realized too late that they had been allowed to come this far, that the enemy had known she was coming and had turned the meeting into a trap. From the walls, hidden turrets emerged, and a squad of heavily armed soldiers poured in from concealed passages, the leaders stepping back to the safety of the core platform. The tall, armored figure watching with that same unsettling smile as the fight began. The chamber roared with sound as the turrets opened fire beams of light, cutting through the air and striking sparks from the metal floor. The iron hounds moved fast, scattering to cover their weapons, barking in return. Vera rolled behind a pillar, the heat of a near miss brushing past her face or mind, calculating paths and angles. The enemy soldiers were heavily armed, but their formation was tight, too tight, leaving gaps between them. The hounds began using those gaps, striking with precision, each shot taking down an enemy fighter. The air filled with smoke and the sharp smell of scorched metal. Vera's eyes never left the tall, armored figure on the platform. They stood still, as if untouched by the chaos around them, watching every move she made. She could feel the weight of that gaze pressing on her like a challenge and a promise. Her grip tightened on her rifle, but she held her fire. She wanted to reach them face to face. The fight surged forward as the enemy tried to push them back, more soldiers pouring in from the side passages. The hounds met them head on, the clash of metal and the echo of shouts filling the space. Vera moved through the chaos with speed and purpose, her team covering her as she advanced toward the platform, her boots hitting the floor with steady rhythm, her eyes locked on the figure ahead. One enemy lunged at her, a blade flashing in the red light. She sidestepped and caught their wrist, twisting hard before driving them to the ground. Another tried to fire from above, but a shot from one of the hounds dropped them before they could aim again. Vera reached the base of the platform, leaping up onto its surface as the tall figure finally drew their weapon, a long blade that shimmered with energy. Their fight was sudden and sharp, the clang of their weapons ringing in the air, each strike and counterstrike carrying the weight of years of rage and loss. The armored figure was strong and fast, their blade moving with skill and precision, but Vera had fought in worse places against worse odds, and she had not survived a fall. Now each move was calculated, each block and strike meant to drive them back one step at a time. Around them the battle raged, the hounds holding their ground against the waves of enemies, the sound of gunfire mixing with the shouts of command and pain. The crimson core pulsed brighter, as if feeding on the fight, its light spilling across the walls and floor, the heat rising in the chamber. Vera saw her opening as the figure overextended, their blades sweeping wide. She stepped inside their guard and struck hard, sending the weapons spinning from their hand. She pressed her own blade to their throat, demanding answers, asking why they had ordered the destruction, why they had let her people die. The figure only smiled, their voice calm, as they spoke of power and control of the weak being swept away by the strong. They said she was proof of their vision, made into a predator by the very pain they had given her. Her rage flared, but she forced it down. She would not give them the satisfaction of control. She told them their time was over and signaled to the hounds the explosives were ready, planted along the main supports of the core. The team began falling back toward the stairwell, covering each other as more enemies tried to push through. The figure laughed low and dark as Vera stepped back from them, their voice carrying over the chaos, telling her that destroying the station would not end, would have been built here, that others would rise in their place. She told them maybe so, but it would not be them today, and with a final move, she drove them to the ground, binding their hands and dragging them with her toward the exit. The station shook as the first charges went off, the core's light flaring, white-hot alarms screaming louder than before. The heat surged as systems began to fail. Vera and the hounds raced through the corridors. The captured figure pulled along with them, the walls trembling, the floor shuddering under their boots. Behind them, the roar of secondary explosions rolled through the station, tearing through bulkheads and sending debris raining down. They reached the docking bay where their shuttle waited, engines hot and ready. Enemy fire followed them down the final stretch, but the hounds returned every shot, clearing a path. The shuttle's ramp lowered, and they threw themselves inside, the doors sealing shut as the pilot gunned the engines, the ship lifting away from the station just as the core erupted in a massive blast. Through the viewport, Vera watched the station break apart, great chunks of black metal spinning away into the void, the crimson light fading as fire tore through the remains. The explosion lit the darkness for a brief moment before fading into the cold silence of space. The hounds sat in the quiet of the shuttle, catching their breath, the captured figure bound in the corner of their eyes. Still on Vera, she met that gaze without fear, telling them that they would answer for every life they had taken. They said nothing, only smiled faintly, as if still holding some secret, but she turned away, not caring for their games anymore. The shuttle rejoined the rest of the Hound fleet, the ships moving together through the dark. The mission was done, the enemy nerve had been cut, and though others might rise, this battle was theirs. Vera stood on the bridge, once more looking out at the stars. Her mind already thinking of the next step, the next hunt. The galaxy was wide and full of danger, but she was ready for it. She had been forged in fire and loss, and she would not stop. The captain approached, standing beside her, telling her that the Hound were with her wherever the fight. When she gave a small nod, the weight of victory and the shadow of what was still to come both resting on her shoulders, she knew the war was not over, but for now the void was quiet, and she could breathe. As the fleet moved on, Vera looked once more at the prisoner, thinking of the long road that had brought her here. She felt no joy, only a steady resolve, the kind that came from surviving when survival had seemed impossible, the kind that came from knowing who she was and what she would do next. The stars stretched ahead, endless and cold, but she did not fear them. She had walked through worse and come out stronger, and as long as the fight called, she would answer. Her name whispered in the dark by friend and enemy, alike a name that carried fear and respect in equal measure. Vera, the apex predator of the galaxy.